Welcome to the Tradies in Business podcast with your hosts Warwick Bidwell and Nicole Cox. Divert your phone and grab a brew as Waz and Nick unpack tips, tales, secrets and stuff-ups from guests both inside and outside your trade, helping educate and inspire you to break the cycle of gut-busting and money stress and create a true trade business.
G'day listeners, how are you today?
Hello listeners. I'm well, thank you for asking.
Yeah, that's all right. They never ask us, do they, Coxie?
No, I can't say I've ever had a listener reach out and say, how are you today, Nick?
I think I have, actually. Usually when we don't put an episode up, it's like, hey, was you okay? There was no episode today.
I have had a few of those. And I've actually had a few people express their, I don't know if disappointment is the right word, sorrow that we're no longer doing the daily tradie Ronacast.
Yes.
Which did surprise me, I must admit.
Yeah, I suppose you and I figured that it was just us rabbiting on and you know, maybe indulging ourselves a little more, but it's been fantastic to hear from so many of you how much value you did get out of our daily episodes, particularly through what I guess was a tough time for a lot of people, you know, from March through till pretty much the back end of June when, you know, it was some pretty heavy stuff going on, a lot of uncertainty. So we're really pleased that we could, I guess, support some of you through the podcast. And I'm going to do a Chucky Norris into today's interview, Coxie, which is a fantastic chat with a younger guy in the trades who very much believes in the same thing of supporting those around us and surrounding ourselves with people who can support us.
Yes.
He's a big believer in having the right mentors and multiple mentors and you know, people to guide us. But probably not surprisingly, he's doing a lot of that for other people within his industry and has built a multiple seven-figure business pretty much off the back of that ethos, I suppose, Coxie.
Yeah, very much so. It's a great chat today, really interesting. I've had the opportunity to catch up with Adrian a few times now. Some of our Coffee with Coxie contributors and joiners will have met Adrian, but he tells so much more of his story today, and it's really quite fascinating. I think the listeners are going to take a lot out of today's conversation.
Absolutely. There's personal insight. There's a pretty funny story about why he couldn't do his passion, his passion for a trade. He was unable to do that. How he actually sort of managed to overcome that, and then how he's gone on to build with now a business partner as well, that multiple seven-figure business, and some pretty funny stories in there about some of his mentors as well. So definitely an episode worth tuning into, an episode worth tuning into, and some fantastic takeaways. And there's a bit of a twist in the tale with my big question that I like to ask. So wait till the end for that one, and you'll find out what I'm banging on about there. But yeah, a fantastic chat with Adrian Walsh from Ecostream.
Enjoy.
So we're joined by Mr. Adrian Walsh at the Tradies in Business podcast. Welcome to the show, mate.
Thanks for having me. I've been, like I said a little while ago to you, been stalking you guys for a while, and this is all part of my master plan.
How do you know we haven't been stalking you? We do stalk some of our guests, but I must admit I haven't really stalked you that much. So why don't you tell our listeners why we've got you, well, not why we've got you on the show, but who you are, and then they might decide why we've got you on the show after that.
Cool. So I'm Adrian Walsh. I have Ecostream Water Management based on the Mornington Peninsula in Victoria. And we do irrigation contracting, consulting, and sales, mainly in the commercial landscape space. I'm a plumber by trade. And there's a bit of a story there that we can get into a little bit later, but I kind of ended up in irrigation, you know, by sort of marrying a love of horticulture and plumbing. Yeah. So we got a few staff, a fantastic crew. And in fact, 3 of our field staff are women, and they are just awesome. And so we got 6 in the field, a couple of us are kind of all rounders. We get out there when we need to, and we've got an estimator as well. Yeah,
it's a big crew. I like it.
Yeah.
Adrian, I have the benefit of understanding some of your backstory, but I'd love you to share it with our listeners today. You had a really interesting journey to get where you are today. Shall we start with the business journey? Let's talk about how you came to be doing exactly what you're doing now.
Yeah, so irrigation, we're trying to get it across the line as a trade in Australia. So I don't even know if it's considered just yet as a trade. But I know Irrigation Australia, they have their Cert 3, and I think whoever the training bodies are in Australia will make it a trade soon. But when I've been in it now for getting on 20 years now, and really the road to get here was difficult in learning, because when the people I was working for, I didn't feel really held training in high regard. And so I started down the road of horticulture. When I left school, I loved horticulture. In high school, I worked at nurseries part-time, and always loved being around plants and building something and seeing something grow, and kind of loved, being in a rural setting as well. So I finished high school and went into a diploma of horticulture. And after the first year, I didn't quite get qualified in it. But at the nursery, as I was picking plants up, I started getting like rashes on my fingers and things. And it turned out I had contact dermatitis from some of the plants. And, it's a horticulturalist with a plant allergy. Like it's
like a doctor that can't stand the sight of blood.
Yeah, and I'm going, shit. At 19 years old, I'm going, my life's ruined. Like, I've wasted a year, and therefore, like, being in this, you think that's the biggest thing in the world. Yes. And and so I'm trying to and my father-in-law, like I was dating Jackie at the time. He had a mate who had an irrigation contracting business, and we're talking about it one night, around dinner, and he's going, "What are you going to do?" And of course, father-in-law doesn't want their daughter with someone who doesn't know what the hell they're doing. And so he goes, I've got this guy, and he's really having trouble finding people, and it's in irrigation. And I've done a little bit at the nurseries and stuff. And I think once I entered, so I went and worked for him, and I quickly saw how big an industry it can be. I always thought, okay, it's a little bit of poly run around someone's backyard.
Yeah.
Well, as a matter of fact, you have every sports field you've got in a council is irrigated. Every elite school around Melbourne has got really high-end irrigation. Every commercial property or new estates, when they're trying to sell their homes, have got it in there, and all the parks and gardens as well. So Royal Botanic Gardens, we're in Melbourne, so it's known for its gardens. So the irrigation around all those gardens, and some of the contracts are way bigger than I would have ever considered. Like, he was at the time, the guy I was working for, it wouldn't be strange to win $100,000 or a $250,000 project. And so that's a far cry from a bit of poly being around run around someone's backyard by a landscaper.
Absolutely.
That's a whole lot of pipe.
Yeah, it is. And it does. Like, we did jobs that had 10 kilometers of drip line in them, and
wowza,
and things like that. But the frustration, like, it was kind of this frustration that, hey, I'm working for this guy, but there's like no courses I can do on it. It does fall under the Victorian Building Authority you need to be like a licensed urban irrigation installer, but the pathway wasn't there.
Yeah.
Like, so the requirement was there, and they had a pathway 10 years beforehand, but they didn't have the pathway to do it. So the way you did it was you had to work under someone illegally in the industry to get the experience, so you could approach the Victorian Building Authority and say, hey, look at my experience.
Wow.
And it was...
It's such a crazy scenario we have where, and what you've described is it's not as prevalent in some of the other trades, but no one will give you a start to get the experience, but no one will take on someone without experience. So where do you go and solve that problem? You know, it's like you said, you've basically got to go and do it illegally, so that you can actually go and legally get recognised. It's crazy.
And when you approach the building authority, they kind of go, "Oh, sweet, you got the experience." Like it's sort of, they never go, "Oh, what have you been doing the last 2 years?"
Yeah,
yeah. So it's kind of like this known problem. But anyway, but being who I am, like it didn't really add up. And so after a couple of years in it, I thought I'm going to go to a plumbing apprenticeship, learn general plumbing. And if I love general plumbing, I'll stay in general plumbing. But I hit the end of it, and I still had that love for horticulture. And I loved the big machinery we were using with like irrigation is just simply a niche of plumbing. You know, it's a specialized area of plumbing. So I got qualified, got licensed, and brought that back into the irrigation world, and ended up working for quite a large irrigation company in Melbourne, and quickly got promoted into a project management role, and fumbled my way through that for 3 years, and but learned a lot and thought I knew way more than I did when I went. And
doesn't sound like a young bloke at all, mate.
And I guess after being a few years in that, and my boss was really fantastic. It was a fantastic training ground for me to then go start my own thing. And so 7 years ago, I went out on my own, started a business, thought I knew everything, thought I was going to take over the world, and very quickly started eating some humble pie there. And do you know what? It was because it was really the arrogance that kind of killed me, and that coupled with the health issue that I had, which just didn't work well with my mind, kind of saw me 6 to 9 months wanting to shut it down, and ending up in mega debt, and in fact, even accepting a job to go, I got offered a job. I went for a job, and I'm like, this is it. And 3 days before I was going to start that job, and by the time, I should say, we weren't winning any work. I could not win a job. I won like 2 jobs in that time. Then I just price work. And I wasn't winning anything. And I'm hitting there, and my wife didn't work, had 2 young kids by the time, a mortgage. And I'm going, there's like $3,000 left in the bank, and there's no money coming in, and I owe 12. And at least we got some equity in the house of shit, really. Like, but I'm going, what went wrong here? And I actually accepted this job. It was quite a good job. Like, it was, it drew on the experience I had already, and I said, I need 6 weeks to start it. Well, 3 days before I was going to start that job, we won a major contract. and I was like, nah, I'm not going to do it. And this is when, like before we spoke on the podcast, this is when some of my mentors came in, and they landed at the right time, and they started giving me some advice around business and whether or not I should be in it. And even though I wanted to take this role, they strongly encouraged me not to, and that they'd hold my hand over the next couple of years.
So they encouraged you to go the business route instead of taking the job.
Yes.
I find that's interesting, mate, because a lot of people are sort of, it's like take the safe option.
Yes.
So that was some pretty good insight from those people around you then, mate.
So let me tell you, I rang, and what was crazy is I didn't know these guys from Bar of Soap. I'd gone to one business event, and I kind of just hit it off with them. And I was really honest with them as well about where I was at. And I think I was so broken by then, I just didn't care anymore. I didn't have a facade to even try to put on.
Yeah.
I was just honest with them. And I didn't realize how successful these guys were. One of them introduced himself as a sign writer. And I then found out that he had a business that screen printed all the Commonwealth Games. You know, he did like 75 kilometers of screen printing. He had a publicly listed company, and he introduced it. At this point, I thought I was calling a sign writer, like, and then another guy was huge in property, but once again, I didn't know his influence or his reach. And he was the one I called, and I said, "Oh, look, his name's Damo, and in fact, we're still really good mates." And and he really celebrates my successes now. But I rang him up and I said to him, I've been offered this job. I think I'm going to take it. And he was not brutal. He was really caring, but he said, well, what's your question? Like, you need to tell me your question and I said, well, should I take the job or not? And he said, why do you want to take the job? And I said, it's security. He goes, no, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, why? And he goes, do you reckon taking a job is more secure than having a business? And I said, yeah. And he goes, no, someone could fire you tomorrow. Their business could go bad. They could fire you tomorrow.
Mm.
And he goes, so let me just crush that view you've got. And he goes, how long is this job that you've just won going to last for? And I said, 6 weeks. And he goes, well, we've got 6 weeks to work some stuff out.
Mm.
And that begun the journey of doing some stuff, rebranding. I ended up getting a business partner who I have now. He's a fantastic guy, and we have our strengths in each area of the business. He's really engineering focused. He's really highly qualified in irrigation, but he gives me some free rein on the business. And my mentors aren't his mentors, but he gives me free rein on the direction. And so moving forward, 7 years ago we had the one-man show that was failing, and now I'm really proud to say that we're really taking a fair chunk of the pie in Melbourne. Yeah.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. And
we know all about your pie, and yes, you're taking plenty of the pie. I do want to delve back into something that you didn't say, but I heard and picked up on there. And a lot of what you were actually talking about was the removal of ego. So if we were to talk broadly about what takes us into business and we think that we can succeed in those big ideals and the puff our chest out and the big conversations we have, and then the crushing heartbreak that you fell into, what that does is actually removes the ego that surrounds us and allows us to be vulnerable and invite better opportunities into our lives. So I'm keen to hear what your thoughts are, Adrian, around ego in business and what you've experienced and seen.
Over the years, we've become really good at knowing how to hide who we truly are. And that can become a really elaborate lie. Mm-hmm. And we can become specialists at knowing how to present ourselves to certain people. And we have no idea that people can see through the bullshit because we think we're presenting something absolutely amazing. And it's why quite often we end up specializing in different areas. Like, there's Adrian, and he is the irrigation business owner, and that's who he is. Yet there's a whole lot more to me, and it's really easy for me to stick within that space, and not venture out of that space, because it's like if I venture out of it, I could be completely exposed. So. At that time, you wouldn't see me go out and swing a golf club, because I'd be completely exposed as a fraud, because I can't swing a golf club, but I can be the good irrigation business owner. Yeah. And what these guys encouraged me to do was start stepping out of my comfort zone into areas that it would reveal who I really am. And the advice they said was, and there's a lot of mentors, I've got to say, there's a lot of people who are giving me their time for no dollars. It's quite unbelievable. And these guys spread across Australia and the world even. And one of them ended up saying to me, he goes, I want you to find, if you went to a Bucks party and the guy said, we're going to go do this now, and you had that hot flush of shit, I don't know how to do that, I want you to go and find mentors in that area. So if, Adrian, you're terrible at playing cricket and you'd never over the last 15 years play cricket, that's exactly what I want. I want to go you to find guys who are going to accept that you're shit at cricket, but just let you have a hit with them and realise that being exposed in that area is not as bad as he ever thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And so I've really been really open over the last 5 years to being exposed and to showing who I really am. And there's some really dark areas that I'm working on, and there's some fantastic areas that I'm good at. And the areas that I think I know I'm good at, I'm now realizing there's so much more to delve into. And I hope that's not being too broad. I'm trying not to make this too wishy-washy, because there's some real depth to it, I feel. And there's certainly depth to it in where I sit, because I've experienced the downfall. And I'll let you guys cut in, because I'm going to.
No, I wanted to ask a question about that, Adrian, and I absolutely identify with and agree with what you're saying about not just finding mentors who do that, but even if we can as individuals, I guess go do things that we suck at and be okay with the fact that we're not great at it. But I wonder for you, is there a way that you've made peace with that feeling of discomfort and embarrassment and imposter syndrome in those places when you do start to expose yourself? Like, has there been something that's helped you make peace with that?
Yeah. So what I've found is, as I've embraced who I am, and there becomes a big yes around who I am as a person. So entering into those things where I feel exposed isn't as scary anymore, because I'm beginning to have a feeling of knowing who I am. And not only that I know who I am, but I'm becoming the person that I want to become. That even though that I'm starting to have more understanding around who I am, there's still further to go on it. There's more journey to go on it. And I'm becoming better, and becoming the type of person that could handle anything. That's really what I'm finding that my goal is becoming. My old goal is becoming, the old me was becoming completely successful. The new me is becoming so resilient that I could handle anything that was thrown at me, and I could dust off. And I'm going to be the guy that says a quote now, but like Teddy Roosevelt, when he talks about being the man in the arena, better to be the man in the arena covered in blood and dust than the scoffer who's sitting at the sidelines. Yes. And in fact, it might be sadistic, I'm starting to thrive at being the man in the arena.
But it is, mate, because when I know for me, part of my upbringing was to be very, not that I led a sheltered life so much as a young bloke, but my dad, he had a really traumatic childhood. There was alcoholism in his big family. There was physical violence, sexual abuse, extreme poverty. Like he had a pretty rough childhood and quite traumatic. And so understandably, a big part of his parenting of myself and my brother was to protect us from things that, the dark things, that to him were bad and evil and should be avoided at all costs. But because of that, I guess I didn't build a lot of resilience, and I suffered a lot of what we call nowadays bullying as a young guy, and a bit of violence through school, and a lot of anxiety and self-doubt and all that sort of stuff. And it took me until my sort of mid to late 30s before I actually started to feel remotely like a man, quote unquote. And so I'm probably a bit like you, mate. It's like I find things that freak me out or that embarrass me or whatever, and I'll go and have a chop at it, because it does. It's like those little cuts. You're in the arena, but you're still alive, right? You're bloodied. But those scars heal and toughen up and actually create more of a not a tough skin, like that impenetrable exterior, and I'm waffling here, listeners, so you're welcome. Tom's probably laughing at me right now. But it is, they just build up that ability to deflect the blows through life. And I guess that's what I'm hearing and what you're saying. I have a question at the end here, Coxie.
Yes.
We work with a lot of people here at Tradies in Business, and in particular in our drawing boards, where I'm seeing a lot of guys especially who they are clinging with a vice-like grip to their trade, to the tools, to the things that they know. And I wonder what your observations have been, Adrian, kicking around the industries, around how to actually shift that so they can start jumping into finance, which flips most of their lids, right? Because they haven't done it, they're not good at it. How the hell do they make that jump, mate?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, and one that's like falling on me trying to that's been a place I've tried to navigate. And I would say one of the sole reasons for the original, because we ended up rebranding, I created a new business, and even though we never went bankrupt and we paid all the debts from the previous one, and we sort of jumped in with this new mind frame. So I guess the original business was like I was all trying to work on it. I was all only trying to create success. But there's something beautiful and pure about those guys wanting to be on the tools. Like, I would start with that. Like, even though there's might be some issues around that they're having trouble letting go, I would start with, hey, those guys are loving being on the tools and finding joy there. They don't need to take over the world. That's what they do. But I would encourage them to find some people in the space that can push them in that area of finance and not just write it off and forget it. So one thing I've heard over time is work on your business, not in it. Well, and I've heard that, and my experience would be work on and in it and love it, because I think the day that you decide I'm just going to work on it, and my experience is you could lose touch, and you may as well just grab a certain amount of money and chuck it in investment and it not be a baby anymore. Part of this for me has been trying to find joy in all situations. So that's why I get back out the tools to go, I need to get muddy, I need to get dirty. And so I would say to those guys there, well, it's not about giving all that up. Like, a fair bit of your identity is probably even tied up in it. Remain the guy, get up, work your ass off, enjoy it, have some banter at work, but maybe half a day a week, go spend some time with someone who can help you with your finances.
Yeah. Yep.
Perfect,
mate.
I want to I think it's similar to the question Warwick just asked, but come at it from a different angle, because we talk a lot about vulnerability and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. But I think we particularly men, get particularly uncomfortable with the thought of what that might feel like. And given that I know that you've done a lot of work around that, Adrian, I'd like you to share, if you can, with us what it actually feels like to be vulnerable, to put your hand up and say, actually, I don't know about that, but I'm going to find someone to help me. What did that feel like to you? Because knowing where you are, where you've been, and what vulnerability feels like for me, it doesn't hurt half as much as you think it's going to. And in fact, there's a whole bunch of power in it. But I'd love our tradies to hear it from a tradie. I'd love them to understand what that felt like for you.
Yeah. So I'm going to refer to, I think the best way is to refer to my mate I was telling you guys about before, Ken, up in Bridgewater. And I don't think we're talking – that wasn't on the podcast, was it? That was before the podcast, I think.
It was before, yeah.
So I'm going to talk about Ken and Gary, his brother. But these guys, I've got some mates. They're Victoria's oldest farming family. And growing up, I thought these guys were the toughest guys that I'd ever met in my life. And they are tough. There's no doubt about it. They're wheat and sheep farmers. They've been on the property since like 1886 or something. Just salt of the earth guys that were tough as nails. And as I became an adult, I saw their vulnerabilities, and particularly with Ken, I couldn't believe when I went up there as an adult. It was like kind of this new, because I'd always gone up with mum and dad, and I'd been a kid running around, we ride motorbikes and have fun, and we'd shoot and all sorts of stuff, and it was great. But when I was about 25, 26, I went up there the first time by myself as an adult, and I got smashed with Ken one night. And it was just anyway, we shouldn't go exactly what happened, but it was a wild night. And it was, what was amazing, like he's in his 60s, and what was amazing is how deep he was. I couldn't believe how deep. And then I started going up regularly, and we didn't get smashed every time. It didn't, I wanted to draw upon this wisdom of this guy that I was sitting in front of, who was salt of the earth, tough as nails. And all of a sudden I was realizing he had a heart. And so I started being pretty vulnerable with him about where I was at. And I'm thinking, man, this is like the toughest guy I know. And I'm opening up in front of him right now, and he is just receiving. Like, he is not judging. Like, what I'd say to that is that most people, particularly people who've experienced pain, will listen and will allow you to be vulnerable. And they'll get it. In fact, one of my mentors, and I kind of adopted it, he said, I'll never open myself up to someone who hasn't experienced pain. And I'll never give myself to them. But if they've experienced pain, they'll listen and they'll understand, and they'll allow you to be vulnerable.
I think it's something we grow up being vulnerable, and we kind of hit the end of primary school, beginning of high school, and it's knocked out of us because as teenagers we're awkward, it's difficult, we don't know what we don't know, and it feels uncomfortable. But if we hark back to when we started playing sport, for example, let's say we all played on a football team, we didn't know football, and we had a coach or a person or a mentor, that pinnacle figure in our life that taught us the skills. And it was okay to be vulnerable then. And it was okay to be vulnerable in school, early years of school. But as we move through, the perception changes and we become, dare I say it, cocky, most of us as teenagers, and feel like we need to know everything, or we do know everything. And if we don't know it, we're going to pretend we know it so that we have that credibility. And then we sort of get to our 30s, 40s and realize, you know what, it's actually okay not to know that stuff. It's okay to put our hand up and ask for help or some direction or show me where I can find out more, rather than being bogged down in this expectation of thinking we need to know everything or pretending that we need to know everything. And imposter syndrome, and that's very much also what we're talking about here, is something that can be actually really comfortably leaned into and you can learn from. There's nothing wrong with throwing yourself into a situation where you've got to swim or you're going to sink. And I guarantee you'll find a way to swim. It might be ugly, might not be very pretty at all, but you will get yourself out of trouble if you're in trouble, because finally you're in a position that'll force you to put your hand up and say, I need help.
Yeah, and I love how you focused on the 30s. And what was interesting, like when I started my business, I was 29. I was like 2 weeks away from turning 30 years old. And Morgan, one of my mates, Morgan, said to me, your 20s are a decade where you finish them with exclamation marks. Every statement is finished with an exclamation mark. And you hit your 30s and you realize that those exclamation marks don't work in every situation.
Yeah.
And you have to start replacing some of it with question marks.
Yeah.
And the other thing about the decade of your 30s, I felt, was it was the first time where the things that I did mattered to other people. So right up to teenage years and 20 years old, what I did was really, like, I could be really selfish and I could have margins, because if I had a big night, going to work wasn't a big deal. But you lose margin in your 30s, and the things that you do completely matter. You're the least important person in your world, you know, and so it's why I think things start unraveling in your 30s. And I was really lucky that they unraveled really early.
Yeah, give you time to actually cash in on the learnings, mate, and get ready for your 40s.
Yep. So, sorry if we've gone too deep too quickly, guys, or if it doesn't make sense. I hope it does.
Have you listened to any of our episodes over the last couple of years? Hey, Adrian, I want to sort of loop back around again as the great grey shark circling in the water, Tom. But the transition from tradesperson to business owner, and I feel like outwardly you could be doing the same things. You know, you could spend 70% of your time on the tools, as it were, and 30% of your time working on the business, as we referenced earlier. And you could do exactly the same stuff every week, but have a completely different identity. And one is as a tradesperson and one is as a business owner. Was there a point where you made that flip? Like, have you seen that happen at all? Is that been applicable for you, Adrian?
I think as the business has expanded and there's been people to train, I've really stepped into that role, in that I enjoy creating the processes that are easy to express to our staff about how things are done. And so my business partner, Richard, he's taken on the role of doing our training videos, and all that is just about the expectation. So what I love doing is still getting out in the field and just trying to work out exactly how I want to do every little aspect of our world, just to improve quality and then really walk closely with our staff and see them grow. So I would say yes. I don't know if I'm answering the question properly, but I have enjoyed flipping from tradesperson to business owner because the flip feels noble. It's not just about money. I'm loving it, building into people's lives. I love the fact that we have 3 female field staff, and I was the one that put the ads out and I interviewed them, and now I can see their careers coming into fruition and them actually building something for themselves. And so I would say that that even though, yes, I'm out in the tools and stuff, I don't run around as quick as I used to. Probably don't sweat as much as I used to. And I probably pick some of the best tasks as well while I'm out there. Yeah.
But as I was listening to you there, Adrian, it's like the purpose behind your time on the tools shifts. And so as that, and look, I don't mean to rag on tradespeople, you know, it is a perfect fit for a whole bunch of people in the industry, whether that's an accountant on the tools who just, you know, is smashing out tax returns, or a plumber who's laying, you know, thousands of meters of pipe. There's nothing wrong with that, and the world needs all the different flavors and colors. But a lot of our listeners are striving to get to that place of having a business rather than working on the tools for money. And I think the purpose, from what you described, Adrian, I like that, is the purpose actually becomes building something that other people can use. You know, you're creating tools for other people instead of just picking up a tool and smashing down a tree yourself. And I really like that way of looking at it, mate.
So, like, I'll explain one of the things that we've done recently that I love that's working really well. So we don't currently run on a traditional, I shouldn't say traditional, but one of the job management platforms. We haven't found one that's right for us. And I've really wanted to get on one, but there's a couple of aspects of things we do at this point that don't feel is going to work well with the existing softwares on the market. But we've sort of pieced a whole lot together. So I use like DocuSign, like for all our swims. We use Drive, like Google Drive. I've got Power Forms running on DocuSigns for machinery checklists. And but we've also, I've got a full-time estimator now because I'm simply not a data guy. Like I used to do all our estimating, and it drove me nuts sitting in front of a plan counting and entering data. Like, but what I did, I got someone in and I paid her to help me, but I had this idea around creating a risk matrix for our projects, for our project pricing. So when you open our costing sheet, you can't do anything until you answer about 10 questions. And there's like a value down the side. So one of the questions would be, are the payment terms favorable for us? And if someone wants 90 days, the sliding bar goes to a 10 and the factor might be 3. So therefore you'd add 30 points to the end figure. But there's 10 questions like that. And these are things that add or take risk from each particular project. And each project will fall in a low, medium or high risk category. And then when you jump into the costing sheet, the margins change based on the risk.
Yes.
And now what's cool about that is that I'm pretty open about that with our clients. So I'm aiming to try to get everything into low risk. Like I'm aiming for, I'm not aiming for projects that have a huge margin on because they're high risk. Some people might call that dickhead tax. Like, it's not just because it's not always because the client's a dickhead. It's because the project's simply not in our favour. It's 200 kilometres away. They want payment terms that are difficult. We need to trench in rock.
Yeah.
It's not a design and construct project. We're a subby to a subby. Like, that's the worst case scenario for us.
Yeah.
We want the best case scenario. What's cool about this particular costing sheet is it makes sense to my clients when they ring me and go, oh, Adrian, you're 15% more expensive than the other guy. We really like you, want to use you. And I go, oh, that project fell in a medium risk category for us. Let me tell you why. And we can start swapping risk for dollars. And it seems like a swap that makes sense to everyone. And then I might save them 20 grand by getting into a low risk category.
It's really clever.
It's
Sorry,
fantastic way to get the client to put some skin back in the game.
Yeah.
Instead of just stepping back and going, there's the job, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
I like it, mate.
So
where else have you, or where else have you observed, perhaps, Adrian, that you do things a little differently or think a little differently to the people around you? Yeah.
So I guess in our world, in our small industry we're in, most of my competitors are a fair bit older than me. So we've adopted technology really quick. Like the fact that all our staff members have got access to the Google Drive and that we've got different levels of input they can have. And what we're finding, so just going digital with all of that was really important because we're finding it difficult to remain compliant without going digital. And the reason was we have to be signed on to SWIMS on our projects. And what was happening is, like, some of our projects span 9 to 12 months. And we've got the shipping container sitting on a construction site somewhere, and and the SWIMS lived in that. And for like 70% of the project, cool, everyone's signed on, all good. But then as the project starts getting built out, there's no room for your shipping container anymore. That stuff might get taken to a local storage facility and the shipping container gets removed off site, and then the SWIMS ends up in someone's ute. And then when I send someone there 3 weeks later, there's no SWIMS on the job, and therefore there's no access to it, even though they're signed onto it. And if WorkSafe come past, we're screwed.
Yep.
And so having DocuSign, using the SWIMS on that. So I still create the SWIMS specific for each project. But the way we do it is I put the SWIMS in, and then we've got a SWIMS declaration form that gets uploaded into each project folder. And it's simply, if I've got a project running at the moment, say we're doing an Arboretum at the moment. So I've got a file there called Arboretum, and there's a safety folder in there. And then when our staff sign the declaration, they simply save the declaration as their name and Arboretum. And if someone comes past, no matter what's gone or stayed on site, as long as their phone's charged, they can show that there's a SWIMS. So I'd say the Google Drive, and that has been really good. Canva, Proposify. Proposify has been my favourite. I absolutely love being able to present beautiful proposals. So even though we use our costing sheet, and I can technically print off a quote straight from my Excel spreadsheet. I don't, because we just transfer everything onto Proposify, some double entry data, but I've got a guy now that loves data entry, so that's good. And so I think some of those things. And the other thing that we've done, we've got a couple of, so on some projects, for example, they need like a Gantt chart written or something. So now I use Upwork and I outsource that. And I've got a guy in Malaysia who does my beautiful Gantt charts. So I'll just literally draw, because I don't know how to use Microsoft Project.
That's not a bad thing, mate.
Yeah. So I'll just hand draw it and just take a photo of it, and then $45, and 2 hours later I've got a beautiful Gantt chart. So using some resources like Upwork, I used a guy in the Philippines to do a 3D drawing for a site cut that we're going to do the other week. We didn't have to do one, but it helped us sell the job.
Yeah.
And the project was $200,000. So that was $75. He did a 3D drawing of the site, what we're going to do. The customer could see what we were doing. And if you can make it really clear on what you're doing, customers love it. So that doing things like that.
Adrian, I wanted to take you back to something that we were talking about before we started the podcast, and something you referenced much earlier in the episode. And that was, I guess, your trade, not necessarily being a trade just yet. and
Yeah.
how you're very passionate about needing this to become a trade, as it should, I believe.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear, because there'll be a lot of our listeners that don't understand that. They haven't experienced, they've taken a traditional route to get where they needed to be. So I'd love to get an understanding around what you had to do to end up where you are and what you feel needs to change in the industry for what you do to become the trade that it should be.
Yeah. So the way I had to go there was, and I think I said it before, but really going down that horticulture route, realizing that ending up in irrigation, realizing that irrigation simply didn't have training. So then doing a full-blown plumbing apprenticeship with a general plumber. He was fantastic, by the way, and just some business skills. But so did some stuff with the general plumber, then bringing that back as a licensed plumber and being able to be licensed in the field. I mean, probably a bit over licensed, really. But the frustration was even though putting the pipes together a bit is covered in the plumbing aspect, irrigation has got some things that are pretty unique in that pressures and flow matter with what we do. They really matter. So if you were just going to turn on your home tap or a shower and water started falling on you, might go, pressure's a bit shit. But that's where it's going to finish. Whereas if the pressure's shit in irrigation on sprinkler system, it doesn't work. So there's a fair bit to know there in learning friction losses through pipe and hydraulics and distribution uniformity, which is to do with how much the nozzles how evenly the nozzles cover an area, and that can improve efficiency. I'll give you an idea. If we chuck in, the industry standard at the moment is to do sprinkler systems. So one sprinkler will spray all the way to another sprinkler, and they call that head-to-head. And that's kind of like this unspoken industry standard. We use something called a dentagram, can't remember. It's called Space Pro. And it's a software where we can place them, and it gives us the distribution uniformity, and it gives us a percentage of efficiency. Yeah. And so sometimes when I chuck those heads in on head-to-head spacing on that Space Pro program, I've got like 55% efficiency. Whereas if I move them in or out or wherever, play around with them, I can get it up to 90% efficiency. On some projects, that can equal $30,000 to $40,000 a year in water saving.
Wow. So
it's the need for training is definitely there.
Yeah.
And the Irrigation Australia is doing a fantastic job in the last couple of years of slowly getting a Cert 3. So the way my staff do it at this stage, because the apprenticeship isn't available in Victoria yet, even though it's the course that eventually they'll do while they're doing the apprenticeship. So essentially I bring my staff on as labourers. We've got a bunch of registered and licensed people in our company already, so overseeing the works. And what I get them to do is to spend a couple of years with us. They do their Cert 3 in irrigation with Irrigation Australia. I pay for it. Well, I bloody pay for it. It's freaking expensive, Irrigation Australia.
I'm going to come work for you, mate.
And then what they do is they take, because the important bit's the licensing. So after a couple of years, they got their Cert 3, they got their couple of years, they take it to the Victorian Building Authority and they go, create a pathway for me. And I've already had a number of staff do this. And then the pathway, the VBA have been really good dealing with this. They know there's a bit of a gap there for new people coming into the industry. And they say, no worries. What we need to do is come and sit this exam, and then we'll put you on like a probationary registration. And that's a pathway at the moment. It needs to be a clearer pathway. That's we need to, for example, all it simply needs to be is I need to be able to go to the VBA and say, hey, I've got a brand new 18-year-old guy starting with me, and I just need to register him here. Yes, he'll be supervised. He'll be this. He's doing his Cert 3. But if one of your inspectors come around, you need to know that he's on your books already.
Yeah.
And that's not available yet. Yeah.
That's awesome, mate. And I know Coxie was just going to jump in there, listeners.
that's
We've
okay.
actually got video running today for a change, so I can see when I'm cutting Coxie off. It's that change to the industries that I think is going to create better opportunities for, obviously, for the younger people coming through, but for the people who are in business at the moment. You know, any of you listening to this that are in an industry where you have wishes for the way the industry would run or change things, or the way the government would change things, as is always the case. And you know, here's my wanky share for the day is, you know, we have to start being the change that we want to see in our industries. And just because you're only one plumber or sparky or builder or whatever, doesn't mean you can't actually lead the way in some of this stuff. And I suspect, Adrian, that this is making you guys an employer of choice in your space. Like, people would be coming to you wanting to work for you. Would that be a fair assumption, mate?
Yeah. Yep. I definitely get calls, and there's certainly people super excited about what we're doing. Like, there's no doubt about it. And I really enjoy that we're getting some recognition there. Yeah.
Good on you, mate. So what does the future hold for you guys? Like, I mean, it sounds like you're working on so many things, mate, and your brain must ache at the end of a day. But like, what does the future look like for you guys?
So I need to be careful. Look, I'm just going to say it. I said before that there's a lot of, like, I'm a younger business owner in this industry. There's a bunch of businesses that are fantastic irrigation businesses Australia-wide. Independents, they've been running for 40 years. The owner's getting up to 60 to 70 years old. They're turning over $2, $3, $4 million a year. And what I'm afraid of is they're going to just drop everything and walk away, because the next generation isn't preparing themselves to take on that type of risk, have the type of capital they need to buy into a business that's doing $3, $4 million a year. Quite often, they've probably got profits of $400,000 to $800,000 profit. And what I'm excited about, and I don't quite know yet, but I kind of feel, and that some of my mentors are speaking into space, because it's like I'm kind of hesitant to grow because I kind of enjoy just doing what I'm doing. But they see something bigger, and they're willing to be involved in something bigger as well. And they're backing me, is what I should say, is that I see the opportunity to position myself to take on some of what I think is coming as monster opportunity. And so over 5 years, even though there's been some really stressful times, and I've stayed awake going, shit, how are we going to pay that? And how are we going to do this? Overall, we run a really profitable company. And I think we're one of the few that could be really well positioned to do something huge with the baby boomer generation that are going, our super is completely tied up in the sale of our business.
Yeah.
And I think we could do something there. So, yeah.
Well, big plans ahead for you, Adrian. That's very exciting.
Yeah.
They're not plans yet. I'm going, I just feel it's there, and I'm going, how could I there's no plans yet, but it's rattling around in my head.
You just shared it on the podcast, mate, so that's part of your plan.
Gonna have to happen now.
And if our listeners don't keep you accountable to it, we will, mate. Coxie, I think, has a question that she would love to ask, mate.
Oh, do I get to ask you $1 million question?
Well, you keep leaning into the microphone. It's like I should shut up and actually let Nicole have a go.
All right, Adrian, I am going to ask Warwick's famous question.
It's a big occasion on the podcast.
I know, this is huge. So can you insert drum roll here?
Yeah.
If you had 1,000 tradies in the room, so 1,000 fellow tradies that are at varying stages of their journey, what is the one thing you would like to leave them with?
All right. So you need to put some mind-ticking music. I should have thought about what's my parting wisdom.
Crickets? We could play some crickets.
I would. Okay, I would say just have a think about the one thing that could take you out. What's the one thing that could take you out? And start working in that space on that thing, because there's a good chance it's coming. And if you had the one thing that would take you out, get some accountability around it. Because I think it's really important. I think we all have that one thing that would wipe us out. And for some guys, it's women, and some guys it's money, and some guys it's power. But there's that one thing that could cause your fall. And I think it's really important to try to recognize what makes you tick and what that thing is. Yeah,
it's good advice.
I love it.
Mate. And it relates back to so much of what you've been talking about with that identity, and go find the dark things that we suck at. And I think that's just like a fantastic summation of that, mate. So awesome chat, Adrian. I know we could probably chat for another 2 hours, mate. We could have all the big brains together here on the podcast, just smoke going everywhere. But mate, if our listeners are like, okay, I want to find out more about this guy and his business, and go and stalk you, as we all like to do these days, what's the best place to do that?
Yeah, so if you went to our website, www.ecostreamwater.com.au, you could see what we're all about there. You could connect with me on LinkedIn. If you wanted to know about this risk matrix or something, I'm happy to have a chat. Just PM. I won't give it any competitors, but if but I can run through it with you and show you what we're sort of doing in that space, because I think it could be really useful for a lot of people. I'm willing to do that. And if you are from the industry, if you're not from the irrigation industry, don't bother. It's going to bore the hell out of you. But if you're from the irrigation industry, we've got Irrigation, Australia's landscape irrigation podcast. So you can check in. But if you're not in horticulture irrigation, you're just going to go, what the hell on this?
Talking about densities and stuff. Yeah. Mate, you geek out on that stuff. I don't know. There might be some electricians who could, identify with that friction loss and everything. It's like,
they would. The Sparkies would be on it, and maybe some of the plumbers as well. Yeah.
Well, mate, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. I must admit, I didn't know what to expect today when Coxie said we're speaking to a bloke that sprays water everywhere. So you've more than exceeded my expectations, buddy. But mate, absolute pleasure, and thank you for all that you're doing for not just your industry but for trades in general, mate. It's fantastic to see leaders and interrupters like you, young blokes, as I can say now, that are actually being part of the change. So, mate, well done and thank you.
Thanks for having me. It's been awesome. Love it.
Thanks, Adrian.
You've been listening to the Tradies in Business podcast with Warwick Bidwell and Nicole Cox. Find out more about today's guest, tools for your trade business, and other cool stuff at tradiesinbusiness.com.au.